Welcome to the EarthWorks podcast, where our team will share the jargon of carbon from many of our turf friends from the past 30 years.
Hi, everybody. I'm Joel Simmons, and this is the EarthWorks podcast. I am very happy to introduce you to a dear friend of, we were just talking, and we don't know how long, but probably a long time, Mr. Carl Samuelson, who is at Newtown Parks and Recreation. And Carl, like I said, I don't know how long I've known you, but probably 20 years, I'm guessing.
A long time, yeah, about 20 years.
I'm guessing. Carl was one of these folks that kind of started his career in golf and has for the last 20 plus years found a really nice home as a Parks and Recs director. And let's talk a little bit about that. You went to Rutgers. Did you go to Rutgers specifically for golf?
I did. I was actually a business management major at Colorado State University.
I didn't know that. I've known you for 20 years. I didn't know that you did that.
And I broke my ankle really bad and had to come home for surgery. And instead of going back to Colorado State, I transferred to Rutgers because I had always been interested in golf, and had always been interested in the turf management side of it. As a kid, I worked at a couple different golf courses, mowing, doing the traditional maintenance crew type stuff.
Right.
And when I transferred back to Rutgers, really decided to make a career of it at that point because I didn't feel like I wanted to sit behind a desk all day, every day.
What was your intent in Colorado? A business degree?
I was a business management with a minor in agronomy.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
There's a lot of those out there, I'm sure.
There is, but yeah. No, just having come home and kind of working, I think I was ready to work more than I was ready to finish school.
So when you first went to college with a business degree and a minor in agronomy, what was the plan? What were you thinking of being?
Ski. That's why I went to Colorado. I applied to Colorado State and University of Colorado to ski. So at that point, I think I was too immature to really have a plan.
Yeah, well, we all are at that age, I'm convinced. Where's home originally? Where did you grow up in Central Connecticut?
So born in Philly.
Oh, that's right. I did know that.
Yeah, moved to upstate New York. I was in Syracuse until I was 7 or 8, and then moved to Newtown, Connecticut, where I am now.
Wow, so you're still
home.
And
then as a kid, moved to a neighboring town of Newtown. So primarily grew up in Brookfield, Connecticut. And then stayed pretty much Western Connecticut the rest of my life.
Yeah. So you graduated Rutgers and you started working professionally on the golf courses.
I did.
Where'd you go?
So outside of little internship stints, I went to Candlewood Valley Country Club in New Milford. I was hired as the assistant superintendent. I was the assistant there for 4 years. And when the superintendent decided he was moving on, I was very interested in the position, but I was also pretty young, so I wasn't sure that I was going to get it. And the owner at the time gave me the opportunity to make it or break it, and I was the superintendent there for 7 more years before the owner came to the decision he was going to sell the golf course. And at the time, he was kind of an absentee owner, and
those are some of the best,
best and worst.
Probably true.
So when he decided he was going to sell the course, I left, my assistant left, the executive chef left. Everybody kind of vacated within 6 months because they were concerned over what was going to happen when he sold the course. So interestingly enough, 21 years later, he still owns the golf course.
Oh,
However,
really?
Yes, he does. However, at the time, having been married, having a young child, I kind of made the decision that I needed more family time, and I needed more. The family side was more important to me than being at the golf course 80 hours a week.
How old were you at that point? How old were you when you made the jump out of
golf? Say 21. I was 30.
So you were still a young man at the time.
Yeah.
Not that you aren't now, obviously, but
50.
But
so I was 29, 30 years old. So I was hired as a superintendent pretty young. And it was interesting. I had a lot of that course was a unique challenge because it was old Still River riverbed, so very silty, high clay soils.
Yeah.
And the Still River, which was our irrigation source, is one of the few rivers that flows north, but it flows through a limestone riverbed in the 3 towns prior to New
Oh,
Milford.
lovely.
So to say that that was a challenge in itself, my water pH was through the roof, and
Yeah, I bet. Loaded with calcium and probably not a whole lot of anything else.
So it was challenging, and the course would flood 3 or 4 times a year to the point where we became a 9-hole course because we had to close 9 holes. So when the flood waters went down, we scraped all the carp off the fairways and reopened.
Hey, fish meal is one of the better fertilizers. Yeah. You know that. I've been selling to you for years, for God's sake.
So that I think every property has their unique challenges, right? But it was all, for the most part, push-up greens. During my tenure there, when I was an assistant, they did buy some adjoining property, and we built 4 holes, and we renovated the rest of the course to accommodate those new holes and make the course was obviously more challenging. But that was one of my first tastes of construction. And I really found my passion in that. Loved, building new things.
Right.
And whether it was new greens, new tees, new bunkers, continued that for the rest of my time there. We always had something going on. So when the position here in Newtown became available, I honestly took the job as a temporary job 20 years ago. So
just to try it out, just to see if you liked it.
No, it was, when I first left the golf course, I was consulting for a company in Lower Fairfield County for all of these 1%ers that wanted a 3-hole golf course at their house.
Oh, really?
What I realized working for that company was I would never be family.
Yeah.
So good company, but I wasn't family, so I was always on the outside. So that's why I was looking, and coming into the sports turf side of it was a new opportunity for me, right? So in my time here, we always have construction projects going on, which because you directly. Well, when I started here, what I couldn't believe was what they didn't do. I mean, they had a contractor come in to adjust part circle sprinkler heads, and I'm going, what? Why aren't we doing that ourselves? So when I started here, there were 4 maintainers and myself. Now we have 14 year-round maintainers, a mechanic, 2 part-time year-round people, and I generally hire like 6 to 8 additional in the summers.
Right. What did you come in as? What was your title when you joined the parks?
Same. Like I said, it depends what piece of paper in town you look at, park superintendent.
Or your website.
Parks or the website. So it's different where you look. Doesn't matter to me. I've never been one to worry about that.
I know that.
The way our park department works, you have the recreation side that runs programs, whether it's through our outdoor facilities or through our community center or through our schools. And then you have the outside facilities, and basically I'm in charge of the outside facilities.
Right.
Anything outside the building envelope is our responsibility.
Let me backtrack. I want to come back and talk in detail about the park, but talk to me about leaving golf and going to parks, and talk to me about that as if you were kind of giving advice to a guy that's might be thinking about getting out of golf. Because I talk to a lot of guys all the time, hey, I'm thinking about taking a job with a municipality or with a school district or park system. And, and there's a lot of hesitation. I mean, there's a lot of love for the golf course. And I think you would share that as well. How hard was the transition for you going from golf to a job in the park system?
So I think the transition 22 years ago, 21 years ago, honestly, I think it was a lot easier then than it is now. And I agree with you. The love for the golf course still is there. And you do things as a golf course superintendent that, quite frankly, you don't have to as a park superintendent. You are manipulating turf in a way in golf that just doesn't exist in the park side of things.
Is that good? Is that a good thing? Or
Well,
is that a bad thing?
I go on vacation and I don't worry about things.
Oh, that's a good thing.
So that's a good thing.
You have kids.
I have kids.
And they know you.
Yeah, they know my name, everything.
Wow.
So I think that was, really realizing I had missed so much of my oldest daughter's first things, whether it's first steps, whether it's when they're first talking. And that was, my wife basically going, I didn't sign up to have an absentee husband.
Yeah.
And
It's a tough thing, man. It's tough.
It's a very tough thing. And when I really started looking around and, again, this is 20 something years ago, some things have changed, but I looked at all my peer superintendents and I was young at the time, but they all smoked, they all drank, they all had a stroke or two. They were all, it just seemed like the stress of the job. Yeah. And again, I had my friends, Jared V. Rengo being one of them, who wanted that high stress, high end. He interned at Wingfoot. I went down and visited him many times. And doing those things, going to those high end clubs, I loved going there.
Of course.
But I knew that wasn't where I wanted to be.
It's a unique personality that can survive something like that.
Correct.
What do you miss about the golf course now after all these years? Anything?
A lot. I still, so this is crazy. I still grind reels for a local and there's something about hearing that grinder going that is just like, it's soothing to me.
There's therapists for that, Carl. You know that. We can help you with these things.
But I enjoy the environment.
Yeah.
I like the equipment. I like the construction in golf. I mean, I see a lot of it in the park side, but with the municipality, it is different. But so I very much have been able to, I guess, direct the department in a lot of ways that I'm able to do a lot of the same things I did in golf.
Right. Were you the first golf guy coming into this park system?
Oh, 100%.
Okay. So you came in with a whole new perspective for these guys and obviously a good one.
So interestingly, I had a ton of support from the athletic director at the time. And, they had a stadium field that they had about 6 blades of grass on.
Oh, good.
And so, when I got here, I had no idea how to make a difference because when I was looking at the budget, I'm going, I can't do anything with this. There's not enough money to do anything. So coming out of golf to sports turf, and I have a couple of guys that are still here that were here when I started, and they were like, look, this isn't a golf course. And they would constantly tell me that. And I'd go, well, why can't it be? So I think the biggest challenge for me when I got here was now Newtown is a fairly affluent town. And they wanted better facilities. And that was really the support I needed to garner. So I basically took all of the money I had and put it into one field, which was the stadium field in town.
And the stadium is used for what? It's used.
It's varsity games. It's the high school stadium field.
Oh, so you're actually managing the high schools. I mean,
we manage all of the school athletic fields.
Oh, you do for the town of Newtown.
Yep. So I took the whole budget and put it into that field, and talk about a big impact. So, the other field.
Was there a downsize to that though? I mean, you
the other fields looked like shit.
Let me get into that, but let me ask you a quick question before you go down that road too far. What's the difference in your mind politically, logistically, from budgetary standpoint, from a dealing with members and or community people when you're in golf versus where you are now? What's the big change politically from the two environments that you golf and
it is
right.
It couldn't be more different, right?
I bet.
So and I think you have to look at golf from multiple levels, but I was at a privately owned daily fee club.
Right.
Again, somewhat of an absentee owner, but you developed a budget and the owner said yes or no. Done. End of story.
One person to talk to.
Yeah. So that's what I was used to. So when I came into town, I really had to learn a lot about the political system. I had to learn about Robert's rules. I had to learn about
They gave you the little red book on Robert's rules and you had to read it?
Believe me, I did a lot wrong.
We all doing that. Yeah.
But it was interesting, but I came to enjoy the political side of it because I loved the challenge of being told no and then figuring out how to do it. Thankfully, I had the support of the athletic director at the time, because the Board of Ed in most towns holds a lot of the pocketbook, right? So I was able to get some funding through the Board of Ed, and I was also able to get funding through the local sports groups. So the sports groups were willing to put money forward if they knew the facilities were going to be improved. So
did you have to go out and sell that? Were you out there hustling all that, or was that being done by people above you?
Both.
Okay.
There wasn't above me. There's a Park and Rec commission that would advocate for public funds. But at the time when I was first hired, they didn't know what they were getting into, right? So, and I don't mean as far as I go, but they didn't know what they were getting into as far as what does it really cost per acre to maintain a decent playing surface, and let's multiply that out by, I don't remember how many fields we had at the time, but it was pretty easy to do a cost per acre and then say, I need a couple $100,000 and I only have 40.
Right.
So, but by really taking that funding for that stadium field at the high school, it was, hey, here's what we can do.
So you took that as the look, if we have funding, we can produce this kind of quality, this kind of environment for you folks.
And honestly, that stadium field, that took 1.5 years to get it to where I wanted.
I bet.
But I took all their money and I spent it there. And I said, here's what we have, and this is going to cost you X amount per acre. And that went, okay, well, if we double our budget, you have twice as many acres. Let's see what we can do. And that's what we did. It was a slow transition. And then we started getting money from the sports groups who said, well, I want my field to look like that. And eventually, as opposed to taking money from sports groups kind of like, oh, they're next in line, we started what we called a surcharge fund. So the surcharge fund was a mechanism for Park and Rec to take in money from its users that wasn't taxpayer dollars per se. It wasn't going through the regular budget. It was user fees.
Yeah.
So we started charging, I think at the time it was $10 per player per season per sport. And they let me use that money for maintaining the fields.
All that money went to your budget.
Yeah.
Wow. Did you have something to do with that, the initiation of that?
Well, that's what we set up in order to get the money, because what was happening was I'd have soccer that says, well, I have 30 grand, I want to do this. And the other group would say, well, I have 40 grand and I want to do that. So through the Park and Rec Commission and everything else, and it was decided that, hey, we can't just have the guy that has the most money come to us and expect their project done. We need to control this somehow.
Thank goodness.
So that's how the surcharge process, which still works today. I think it's $30 a person per sport now. It's gone up, but that money is used. Interestingly enough, now we don't use that money for natural turf operating budget anymore. That money is now used for capital projects that don't get funded through the normal budget process.
Oh, really?
So, for example, and to a lot of people's demise, I'm using, $700,000 of that money this summer to build an artificial field at our high school.
Good. Yeah.
So we've used that to install multiple field sports lighting.
Yeah.
We've used that to replace artificial surface fields. We've used it to build natural fields. So that money really gets used for bigger projects now, as opposed to an operating budget.
Let's come back to that, because I do want to talk about the the controversy of natural grass over synthetic. But go back and talk to me about I love the idea of you took all the money in your bucket and poured it into one field. What was the battle strategy? What did you end up doing? And you said it's a couple of years before it really took off. What was that couple of years like? It had to be a little bit challenging if they saw all the money going into this thing and it wasn't overnight success.
I'll be perfectly honest with you. It wasn't, because
it doesn't sound like it,
because none of the fields were in very good shape.
Yeah.
So culturally, without spending a lot of money, whether we were aerating, whether we were doing little things that were making a big difference that had never been done before. So it's not like we weren't spending a dime on any other fields, but hey, nothing's been aerated here in forever. So we're aerating a couple times a year and throwing some seed down. That was a huge difference. We were filling in the 6-inch holes in center field. We were filling in the 8-inch depressions, goal mouths. So we were doing things that people saw that made a difference. Although from a buying fertilizer, buying seed, buying soil amendments based on soil tests.
What a concept.
That's what they weren't seeing.
Yeah.
And that's what we were able to do at the stadium field, blue and gold field at the, which used to be Bruce Jenner Stadium, by the way.
Why? Was he from there?
He graduated from Newtown High School.
I had no idea. It's changed name, I take it, since
it's not
recently?
Caitlyn Jenner Stadium anymore.
No, it's been changed. Yeah.
It is Blue and Gold Stadium. So
let's get into the agronomy of this, though. What did you actually end up? So the first you get in there, you make that decision, which is pretty risky. I mean, you think about what you pulled off and thought about pulling off. I mean, to pour everything into one stadium, but the idea of being able to show the community, if you concentrate and fund this, we can make you a great thing. What was the first? So your first thing you did was soil testing.
I have to say that I was used to soil testing coming out of golf. It was just that was. Of course,
I would hope so.
That's what you did.
Yeah.
So I didn't honestly see it as a big risk, just because I didn't think any of the facilities were really in good shape. And I have to go back to, I had so much support from the athletic director. And at the time, the athletic director had been in town, 20 years. He was very respected and revered. So as long as Greg gave his stamp of approval, I knew I had support.
You had backup.
I did. And, I kept telling Greg, we can make this field really nice. And he was like, well, I've heard that before. I've heard that before. So when I was doing soil testing at the stadium, from one end to the other, it was 3 completely different soils.
Yeah, I think I remember that, actually.
Yeah, and the soil was garbage, but we had to make it work. And I think one year we aerated that field like 8 times, and just trying to get some amendments in the soil, trying to just give the plant a chance, right?
Yeah, get some air down there, for God's sake.
So I think half the field was like old swamp muck, and the organic material was through the roof. You had a field that actually had a 3-foot crown in the center of the field to the sidelines.
You're kidding
so
me.
Surface, no, because what happened is there were such heavy soils. When they first built the field, they would wear that football depression down the middle, and it was just like a pond. So they kept adding material and
kept pouring stuff in.
So, it was funny because I remember core aerating there and collecting, thinking I'm going to reduce the height of the center of the field. It was an uphill battle, literally.
No pun intended. Yeah.
But just through regular cultural practices, nothing fancy, nothing special, something that golf course superintendents would laugh at because how basic it was.
Yeah, it's common sense. Just so people understand that are maybe not sports turf guys, what is the normal height of the crown?
And so we usually go by percentage, right? So when you're inside of a track, from the track edge to center field might be at the high end 2%.
Right, and you were 3 feet.
Yeah. So when you were standing on the home sideline, you couldn't see the visitor sideline.
Oh my goodness, that's unbelievable. Yeah.
So, and I think like even artificial turf crown from the sideline to center field is like 0.5%.
Yeah, it's not 1%. Yeah, exactly.
No, this was feet.
Yeah.
So, over time, we got to the point where people would pull in and they would go, "Oh, I didn't know this field was artificial," and we go, "It's not." And they were like, "What?" And I got the athletic director to stop practicing on the stadium field.
How do you pull that off? That alone is a miracle.
Well, after we improved the turf conditions, and then we were able to get a little more money and improve the turf conditions on the backfields where they practiced.
Where they could practice. They were okay.
Didn't mind practicing on the backfield. So I said, you really want to make the next step here. you make that stadium field game only. So that's what we did. So, none of this was overnight. It all took time.
Yeah.
But we basically took a number of fields in town, the best agronomically and the best, as far as the newer fields, and we made them game only.
So Carl, you're the advocate for all this. You're the one that's basically going out and pushing this agenda. This was your agenda that you then had to politically weave your way through a series of folks. Obviously, I mean, I assume you're working more, with more people than just the athletic director.
So it was the athletic director. It was the Park and Rec Commission at the time. So the Park and Rec Commission and the Park and Rec Department, reports to the Board of Selectmen. So, and the athletic director reports to the Board of Ed, and Park and Rec and the Board of Ed, work pretty intimately in Newtown. So I think it sounds harder than it was at first. It sounds
hard. It sounds like a lot of.
Actually, at first, it wasn't bad, and it wasn't bad at first because they had such poor playing conditions that anytime they saw even small improvements, they didn't question it.
So when you went from 6 blades of grass to 25 blades of grass, they thought you were a hero.
Huge improvement.
Right, exactly. Big percentage.
And then, I can remember one of the things early on from an irrigation standpoint. They had nobody here that ever knew how to manage water. You just turned the water on every night, right? That's what you do.
It's exactly, right? It's in the book.
Half an inch a night. I'm sure that's fine.
Yeah.
So, little things, turn the water off.
Yeah.
Made huge improvements.
Well, that's probably the biggest single fall of any agronomist, is too much water. Once you're there, it can't take it back.
That was huge.
I bet.
And I happened to be coming in at a time, sports took off in this town, nothing to do with me. It's just Newtown was a bedroom community for New York City and a bedroom community for GE. So you had a lot of people that chose Newtown to raise their families. And we had really, really politically active sports groups. So you got a lot of support from the sports groups at the Board of Selectmen meetings to build a new field or to put more money in the budget. So as things were really improving, I wasn't getting a lot of resistance. Like, well, can't we do it cheaper? No. Like, this is what it costs.
Because you showed them the quality of product that you could provide them with the budget.
Correct. And when we did it, it wasn't even what I thought was super high end. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
Agronomics.
Yeah, this is crap. I could get you really good stuff with more money.
So it was interesting. But what I think coming from golf into the municipal side of things, I was able to relax a little bit because I didn't have the member guests the next day.
Right.
I didn't have my grass at 100 thousandths of an inch.
Right. Exactly.
I'm laughing because I built a new 90-foot baseball field when I was here, and we were cutting it at I think for the first couple of years we had it at 3/4 of an inch. And that was unheard of.
Right.
You know what I mean? It was like a T.
Yeah.
And it was amazing to me. I want to raise my mowing heights. I just raised my mowing heights. I didn't have to ask anybody. I didn't have to get permission.
You didn't get yelled at by everybody that came on the field.
Yelled at by a greens committee.
They didn't even realize you did it, probably.
So it was a much different atmosphere. And it was an atmosphere where everybody wanted to work with you because you were improving conditions. It wasn't just, I didn't feel like everybody was just pointing their finger at me because the greens were.
This might be a stupid question that probably shouldn't be asked, but any idea what percentage of budget has it increased since you've been doing all this work? I mean, what I'm getting at here, Carl, is how do you help a guy in a position similar to yours to improve the budget?
So if I had to do the exact same thing, Joel, and it's interesting because I now have it broken down. Actually, we're trying something new where I'm actually breaking it down per field now. But for the past, say, 15 years, I've had my A fields, my B fields, and my C fields. And my A fields were fields that either had been built with surface drainage, had subsurface drainage, heavy irrigation, I'm allowed to use pesticides. My B fields were fields that had irrigation, maybe didn't have drainage, and I'm not allowed to use pesticides. And my C fields are fields with no irrigation, whether I can use pesticides or not.
Yeah.
So
what's the rules for pesticides in your
so
area?
K through 8, we have a 25B registration list. We're allowed to use 25B products on K through 8.
Okay.
I'm not really a believer. I'm kind of a seed bank guy. Interesting. I just got off the phone with Dr. Jason Henderson from UConn, and we were discussing, because it's been 10 years since the pesticide ban. So we were
I didn't
discussing.
realize it was that long. Wow.
We were discussing what we see 10 years later.
Yeah.
I have my own opinions on it, but we have changed and been able to change, again, fairly affluent community, but we've changed the use of our K through 8 fields to where the impact of no pesticides has been mitigated to a point.
Explain that. How did that happen? And what is the difference?
You know, we had some primary use sports fields at our K through 8 schools. We have made it so that only like the T-ball kids and the youngest baseball kids are at K through 8 schools. So we don't have clay infields at our K through 8 schools. We have what we call lollipop fields. So I have an 8-foot clay circle at the bases and home plate and pitching mound, but I have grass base paths and grass infields.
Yeah.
So I'm not trying to keep weeds out of clay.
Right.
So we have, and partly through our road sand project, we have leveled a couple of the elementary school fields where we've increased the amount of playing surface. So we're able to spread the wear out a lot more.
Perfect.
But we've tried to put as much non-competitive field use at our K through 8 schools as we can.
So you're not beating them up all the time.
Not beating them up. We've increased the surface area. We've raised mowing heights. Dr. Henderson and I were talking a lot about, last year was a bit of an anomaly. I was wondering what I did right because the K through 8 fields looked wonderful, but really what it came down to was because of COVID and remote learning, I wasn't getting.
There just wasn't as much pressure.
There wasn't the wear on the field.
Gotcha. Yeah.
Nothing I did. But
it's funny. I just interviewed Tony Leonard from the Eagles, and he was saying last year was the first year that they were able to carry the field over because they didn't have the physical play.
Right. So yeah, we definitely didn't have as much physical play.
That's interesting. You've always been a believer. I mean, you and I, got to know each other long ago, and you've been a big believer of biological soil management. So you've been following all those practices, the concept of treating the soil properly. So I can't imagine that that's not a big part of getting through all of that pesticide restriction.
Absolutely. I think it absolutely is. I've always been, from the beginning, how can we incorporate biological soil management, and especially working for a municipality?
Yeah.
The political side of it. I was at a budget meeting the other day, and basically with, material costs going up and everything else. And I said, look, this is one of the things we may have to do. And, we may have to go away from some of the organics we're doing and go synthetic because cost per acre, some of the organics might exceed what. And I got the look like, well, we don't want to do that. And I knew this was going to happen. And I said, well, obviously some material costs going up 20, 30%. Our budget isn't going to go up 30% overnight.
Right.
But one of the things that was stressed is that's like last resort for them. They like what we're doing. They like that. Good. A lot of we have a couple of political action groups in Newtown. One is the Newtown Pollinators. And we coexist.
Really?
We coexist very well.
Yeah.
But when they look and see what materials we are primarily using, obviously your materials are a big part of that. And they go, "Oh, we had no idea." And I'm like, "Well, I believe in feeding the soil." And when you explain that process to them, they have a different respect. And a lot of their.
I'm not completely stupid after all. That's
a lot
brilliant.
Of their interests, they may not be educated to the level that people that really know what they're doing are. But when you explain them and go through the process and they understand that your passion is also based on being environmentally friendly and not just spraying Roundup everywhere.
Right, exactly.
They respect you in a different way.
So you had to go through some educational processes to explain
100%.
your philosophy on managing your soils and then the marriage between that and keeping the field at playing condition.
And have actually invited and taken, whether it's my park and rec chairman or somebody politically involved in town or the people in these Newtown pollinator groups, I've taken them to like Yukon field days where they're
cool.
where they're discussing this stuff and how can we be after the pesticide ban, how do we exist, how do we coexist, how do we protect our bees, how do we so doing that process really, we talk on the phone with those groups all the time. So it's just and hey, I did a knotweed experiment with our Newtown pollinators this year, and it's not over. Cool. But we had an outbreak on our Fairfield Hills campus, and
of knotweed,
and they really wanted to hand eradicate. And they were.
So you're going to send all the pollinators out there with their little forks to pull them out?
Yeah. Well, the Japanese knotweed. So
which is impossible to get rid of.
Right. So we took the area after they handpicked it twice, and they said, "Yeah, we lost all our volunteers. They won't do that again."
Shocking.
I said, they wanted to use. They had a certain chemistry in mind for a pesticide that they wanted to use, and they had a organic solution they wanted to use. And I said, let's cut it up into 4 areas. We'll do a control area. We'll do a glyphosate area. We'll do your organic area and the other chemistry you want. And they agreed to that.
The other chemistry was selective herbicide?
Yes.
Yeah.
So we went through that process, and going through that together, again, whether it failed miserably or not, and it didn't, it was interesting. But the bonding or the ability to work together. They know that I'm not out trying to destroy the environment. And that goes a long way in a community.
Well, just the fact that you had time with them and they could kind of see who you are and your passion for what you do, and the fact that you do believe that the soil is part of it and the environment is part of it. I mean, it's a big, huge part of what you're doing in a community like yours. So,
and we've worked with a lot of groups. Trout Unlimited is a big one.
Oh, really? Cool.
We have 2 of the streams that run through Newtown. One is one of the only natural reproducing trout populations in the state.
Oh, how
so
cool.
We're pretty careful with that one.
Yeah, I would hope so.
But so that's how we got involved with the trout groups or the watershed associations. Whenever we're planning to do something, we'll have a discussion with them, have a meeting with them, and involve them. A lot easier to involve them up front than it is to tell them after the fact.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Carl,
do you go out and find those folks, those community groups, or are they coming and finding you? I mean, how are you proactive in this and getting there, or is it even feasible to be proactive?
It's 100% feasible to be proactive.
Okay, 100%. Good.
And the thing for me, my initial intention probably wasn't as much. What I've realized the benefit of working with them wasn't my original intention. My original intention was trying to work with them because their access to grant money.
Oh, gotcha. Perfect. Brilliant. Actually, think about it from your possession.
We've done a ton of stream bank renovations through my parks. I had a federal government grant to daylight a stream in one of my parks.
What's that mean?
So when they built one of the parks in town, they literally dredged a swamp, made part of the elevations a lot higher and part of the elevation lower. The lower elevation became the town swimming hole.
Oh, great.
Yeah, wonderful. But when they did that, they piped the stream that used to exist through the park underground.
Really?
Yep. So, going back through old historical data, one of our reporter's brothers who works for the federal government kind of said, I've noticed that years ago that there's a pipe there. And I'm like, well, let's daylight it. And, they daylighted it and vegetated it and created, an extension of Deep Brook, which is the naturally producing trout stream, as opposed to the town swimming hole that dumped into Deep Brook. So,
Oh, wow. So it's now a stream again.
it is a stream again.
Oh, how cool. So, I mean, part of your job is, obviously your job is not growing grass. It's a small piece of that is probably growing grass.
I came here to grow grass and realized very quickly that there was a lot more to it.
Yeah.
So we spent a long time, but we've gone from 24 or 25 athletic fields to 42. So
In the 20 years you've been there, you've doubled your fields.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you've built all of those?
No, we've built in-house. We've built like 6 of them.
So that's pretty amazing in a couple 20 years.
But some of the fields were more renovations. Some were completely new location, entirely new athletic fields.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Let's talk about, you and I talk about this a lot, but let me get into this idea of yours that I'm still baffled by. And I remember the day you called me and asked me my opinion on this, but and I'm going to let you explain it because you'll do a much better job than I do. But the gist of it is you built a field out of road ashes and cinders. And I know it's not quite that way. But when you first explained this to me, I'm like, what the hell are you talking about? You can't grow grass on that shit.
So yeah, and so for my whole time here, there's a mountain down at Public Works, and they call it Mount Hurley. And Fred Hurley is the Public Works director. So
okay, I was named after Fred. All right, good.
Well,
what is this mountain?
Mount Hurley was 2 things. When they first did a sewer line in Newtown, it was all the excavation spoils.
Yeah.
From building the sewer line, and then obviously the Northeast for years used sand in the winter.
Right.
Well, there's a couple things have come around, which is I can't remember now. It's MSW4 or MS4, which is federal stormwater guidelines. So some of the stuff that had come around was, in order to get the state money for your roads, which comes from the federal government, you had to prove that you were pumping out your catch basins every year.
Oh.
So they were sucking out the catch basins and adding to Mount Hurley.
Gotcha. And what is this stuff?
Well, in the sumps of the catch basins, it's primarily the road sand that they're putting down, or eroded materials. Right. So plastic forks and diapers and everything else.
Lovely. Lovely.
Yeah, drink stirs, and it's everything.
Yeah.
So, but the sand is the sand.
Right.
And, when I first got this idea, it didn't come from building a field. The first idea of it was top dressing. So.
Oh, I remember that. I remember you talking to me about that.
I had been buying top dressing.
Spending a lot of money. And I wanted a lot more top dressing than I could afford. And that was one of my things. How can I really level some of these fields? How can I really improve some of these fields that I don't have the money for? So I'm like, well, here's free sand. So I started testing the sand. Aside from all the garbage, when I went to the state, DEP at the time, there was nothing in that sand that prevented me from using it on my surfaces, except that the sodium was through the roof. From road salt, I assume.
From road salt. And the barium levels were high.
Where'd that come from?
I have no idea.
Barium?
So, yep. And
that's interesting. I didn't know that.
Right. So, but there was no regulation on the barium side from the state to prevent me from using it as top dressing. So.
And they didn't care about the sodium either.
They didn't care about the sodium either. They were.
No, what tests did you do? You did chemistry test, I assume.
We did chemistry, a lot of heavy metals. It was, organophosphates. We went through the whole battery originally.
And you found everything.
Found everything. It was surprisingly, it was cleaner than I anticipated. But what made me more interested in this was when we did a particle analysis.
Right.
This stuff was so close to USGA spec. You
And have you screened it at this point or no?
No, not yet.
So you hadn't even screened it, and your physical tests were close to USGA specs?
From the sand particle size, yes.
Okay, I got you. But you still had garbage in it.
Yes. So
diapers. I mean, it's hard to grow grass on diapers, I've heard.
right. So essentially, I had to buy a screen for the Public Works screener because they had like a 3/4 inch screen.
Right. Yeah, they were getting rid of
I
boulders.
wanted it screened down to 3/8.
Yeah, of course.
I bought a screen, a couple $1,000s, and they started screening this stuff down to where it would get all the garbage out. And now I just had the stand that was left and all the fines. And what we realized is the further I went into the pile, I mean, the inside part of the pile, and I think they spent, 4 or 5 days with an excavator kind of transferring the outside to the inside and vice versa. My sodium levels were lower, my barium levels were lower. And this is the stuff that got dumped there, 15 years ago, right?
Are these your guys that are in there with the excavators?
Yes.
Your crew?
Public Works guys.
Guys on your staff, though, your employees.
Public Works employees at this time.
Public Work. Okay, so these guys are sitting there thinking, who is this crazy guy and what the hell am I doing this crap for?
100%. But all they cared about was, hey, you want to get rid of my pile down here? Absolutely.
Oh, you're getting rid of the mountain, yeah.
So it was a win-win because they wanted.
Gotcha. So Mount Hurley goes away and they just have to move it around a little bit.
Right.
Well, were there a lot of fines in the finished product?
No, actually not. So
that's fascinating. I mean, that's shocking to me, really. I remember talking to you about that because that was my first concern.
See, I think interestingly in the sumps, I mean, I think a lot of the fines, unfortunately, end up in waterways, right?
Washed out, yeah, completely, yeah.
So what I was left with, it was like every category was just slightly coarser. When you looked at the breakdown of a USGA spec, 10%, 2 mil, I had 50%. And if it was 20% this, I had 25%. But it wasn't for an athletic field. Like I'm not building a USGA spec green. I'm going, I see no reason why I can't use this.
It was heavier on the coarse side versus heavier on the light side, which is probably fine because you can manage. I mean, it just means managing water a little different. At least it's not going to block it.
We took a number of samples from existing athletic fields and took more of this screened material and sent it out for bridging analysis and sent it out for different, and nobody said no.
Yeah.
Everybody said it should work.
So let me ask you this though. I mean, it's like the first guy that ever drank milk, you looked at this mountain and you said, hey, I could make top dressing out of this mountain of garbage and old macadam. I mean,
right.
How did that thought process in your head come about? And nobody gets the joke about drinking milk, but
came by is free.
Free was the motivation. That makes sense.
And then I think once we kind of said we had this screened and we knew the physical makeup would work, and we knew that the bridging side of it would work, that's probably when I called you and said, so I have this stuff that's pure sodium.
Right. Exactly.
How do I mitigate it? And that's when we started playing around with kind of blending this with compost. And it wasn't economically feasible to do like a kick flush program on a couple thousand, yards of this.
Yeah.
So, I think one of the questions I asked was, well, do we use it as top dressing and then do a remediation program on top of that? And, when we ended up blending in compost and just kind of, there wasn't a ton of science to it.
No, honestly. I remember that, but it was brilliant. I mean, if you think about it.
It was, hey, keep turning this pile over, and we let this stuff sit, and with the compost in it, we probably turned it over once every 3 months.
Before you did anything with it.
Yeah. And surprisingly, when we started doing testing on the product, and I don't even think it was a year after we started it, but, we noticed that the sodium levels were going down. There was nothing that prevented me from trying it. And
right.
I started trying it as top dressing, and we had pretty good results. I wasn't spending a lot of money to get the material that I wanted for top dressing.
How long did you let it sit before you started using it as top dressing?
Maybe a year.
Wow, that's not bad.
Like 9 months.
Yeah. And you've built fields out of this since then, right?
We now have built 2 fields entirely out of it.
Wow. And how are they doing?
So I think the first field, both fields are doing okay. One field is non-irrigated.
Okay, so there's a limiting factor there.
We fought the sodium issues there with sodium wilt, and put a little more into trying to reduce the sodium at that field. The second field, we stripped the site of topsoil. We basically stripped the turf off. We stripped the topsoil off. We took our compost amended street sweepings and blended it with the native topsoil, and that's the field.
How much topsoil in percentage?
Probably less than 25%.
Okay. So still a pretty good slug of topsoil in that sweepings.
I'm going to say 20%. I think it was, when they were blend, and again, I wasn't blending this in a blender. This is two guys on big loaders.
Oh, really? Again, guys that love you.
So, they were using 3 big loader scoops of the sweepings.
Yeah.
To 1 topsoil.
Gotcha.
And but really, when you look at that from a bulk density standpoint, your 3 buckets of sand are a lot heavier than your 1 bucket of topsoil. So it was, and that's what I'm saying. It's probably 20% would be my guess as far.
What was the first field? Was there soil in that one?
No, straight.
So that was straight sweepings.
Straight sweepings.
And obviously, maybe not obviously, but I would assume that the second field performs better.
Yes, it does.
Yeah, it's got some holding. What's the holding capacity on that sweeping? Is it really, really, really low, like straight silica sand would be, or is there some dirt in it? I mean, obviously you got sodium, so that would raise CEC.
It has. I think we continually top dressed that with compost.
Okay.
A couple times. So I don't, off the top of my head, don't know exactly what the exchange capacity is in that field. It has come up. I mean, that field is now
over. How old are they now?
I think the first one's like 5 years old.
Okay. Yeah.
And the second one is 2 years old.
I mean, I can't imagine that most city park systems have their own Mount Hurley. Is that common?
I think Northeast, I think it's common to have street sweepings. I don't think most municipalities will admit what they do with them.
All right, maybe we don't want to talk about it.
The way they're supposed to be treated, it's very interesting because in Connecticut, it's legal to bury it.
Oh, really?
Probably shouldn't be, but it is legal to bury it.
Why didn't you guys bury it?
They would attempt to reuse it. So some towns will screen it and reuse it the following winter.
Oh, that's interesting. Is this something that guys in similar positions to yours should look at? I mean, would you encourage that if you were giving somebody advice?
We are a well-equipped park department.
And you're crazy, you know that too.
Right. But as far as
I said that to you when you first asked me about this. It's kind of crazy, Carl.
When I talk to a lot of my peers about it, they don't have the equipment to do the same thing.
Yeah, I can imagine. Yeah, screening and all that.
When I did it for the second field, I rented a screener for a month.
Oh, good. Okay.
What I've realized is a trommel type screener,
right,
is a lot better for that material than a shaker deck.
Yeah, so, I would think so.
I've gone through the process, and again, here's where that surcharge money comes into play.
There you go.
Commercially, it was going to cost $350,000 to build a soccer field, and we did it in-house for $50,000.
Gotcha.
Used street sweeping. So when you come out with a finished product, it takes us longer than if you had a contractor come in.
So say that again. How much money do you think you ultimately saved from head to toe using these street sweepings as opposed to going out and buying sand?
$250,000 plus.
Wow, that's quite significant. I mean, think of what you can do with that money, and now you have a new field.
And it's not. We didn't have the 300,000, right?
Yeah.
So we had 50. Can we do it? And we did it. So really, the town benefits because now you have a playable athletic surface that you wouldn't have had otherwise.
Yeah, that's fascinating. All right, we're going to run out of time, and I need to ask you a couple questions. And the one that I really want to get to has always creeped me out since the first time I came to your office. Explain to me and I assume you're still in this building.
Yes.
Explain to everybody where the hell you are in terms of what this building is and what it was.
So my maintenance facility is on the Fairfield Hills campus. Fairfield Hills State Mental Hospital operated from the 30s through the 90s. They started, as mental health care changed in this country, they started shutting portions of the campus down. And only the medical parts remained, which was like a state detox hospital. But the campus was for the criminally insane.
Yeah.
So they kept everybody locked in buildings. The living quarters in the buildings were cells. And it was a 100% self-sustaining campus. It was originally like 700 acres. They had their own farm. They raised their own food. They grew their own food. They used number 6 oil for their steam generators to heat everything. Wow. They did their own laundry. And the buildings that the patients, inmates, however you want to classify it.
Let's call them patients.
The buildings that the patients had to go between were all connected by tunnels, because these were people that were locked up for one reason or another. So they couldn't just have them outside.
Couldn't have them wandering aimlessly through town. Yeah.
So as I showed you,
yes,
the buildings originally, when the town took over, I think 2/3 of the buildings on campus were connected by pedestrian tunnels. Now those pedestrian tunnels were 6 feet wide, 8 feet high, at the time well lit, at the time well ventilated.
See, my memory isn't even that they were that big. They were like little round holes in the ground. Kind of freaky and scary.
But there was also utility tunnels. Utility tunnels were
different,
3 or 4 feet wide, with asbestos pipes, steam lines down every side of it. But so they used to transport the patients via the tunnels. So for a long time, before the town started removing the tunnels, we could go from building to building to building in the tunnels.
And did you?
Oh yeah. I mean, when I first started here, it was a novelty. Like, you went into the buildings, and if you wanted to really creep somebody out, you went in the tunnels.
Especially, and you did that to me actually once.
Especially on like a nice summer day with a thunderstorm in the afternoon.
Oh, great! Oh, thank God it wasn't doing that.
But so yeah, I mean, it was, as I think I told you, the movie Sleepers was filmed on the Fairfield Hills campus, so you get a good glimpse of what the tunnels were like in that movie.
I mean, and I guess some of the buildings have since been torn down, or recently been torn down, right?
The town, took, I don't remember when we took title to the campus, but the buildings are dilapidated to a point where any of the buildings that are going to be reused probably have been. Yeah. So the remaining buildings, and I mean, these are buildings where, they're a couple 100,000 square feet.
Yeah, they're huge buildings.
They're all 6 by 8 cells. There's nothing you can really do in that building.
No.
So
except be creeped out completely, which is what I was.
100% creeped out. But don't forget, the way mental health care was then, they were doing lobotomies on site. We had Yale Laboratories was the morgue. When I first started here,
I didn't know that. Oh God, that's creepy.
So there was an MTV, what was that, Fear Factor show?
Yeah, Fear Factor.
One of those in the morgue, which was called Yale Laboratory. It had a crematorium in the basement.
Oh
and
God.
It had the regular morgue drawers and the dissection tables and all that stuff. So yeah, you went in there on a creepy dark afternoon in a thunderstorm, and it was.
And not that I want to get into any of the details, but I remember vividly pulling out, I don't know if it's in those files behind you, but you pulled out some old files, and they talked about the doctor's notes on, you'd mentioned lobotomies and a bunch of other things, but man, it just, I remember you reading me some of these things, and I'm like, all right, I didn't sleep for 3 days, Carl. Thanks very much.
When we took over the buildings, it was like the state employees punched their card and walked out like they were coming in the next day. I mean, they didn't remove any of the patient files. They didn't remove anything. And
wow.
So, I mean, when we're cleaning that stuff out, I mean, you would think that stuff should have been taken somewhere, right?
Yeah, you would think, right?
But no, I mean, there was years of patient files in the basements of the buildings that, shock therapy and lobotomies and different. Wow. It was really freaky how they treated you.
When did they shut the institutions down?
So they started shutting this one down in the 80s.
Oh, was that late? I thought it was earlier than that. Wow.
No, so I mean, it was pretty active, and they started shutting components down in the 80s, and they went to more of like group home or
Gotcha.
mental health care changed, right?
Yeah.
And it changed
Well,
through medication, through just different way of doing it, and
yeah.
but they kept the medical part, which was basically a drug detox hospital.
Gotcha.
That stayed open until the 90s.
Okay. What's your actual office? Was your office the mechanics of?
My office, this building was laundry and the firehouse.
Oh, that's right. You told me that. Laundry.
Campus had their own firehouse, but they did dry cleaning. They had all the big laundry. We had a pretty decent environmental cleanup behind my building because the dry.
I was going to say that's got to be pretty nasty sitting in that stuff. That's crazy.
So the whole building, we did like a $1.8 million to get rid of asbestos and everything else. So.
Well, I hate to say this, my friend, but we've just chatted for an hour, and I gotta get on to other chores.
Absolutely.
It's always a pleasure talking to you, and I'm always fascinated. I love your creativity. I hope that this conversation inspires a lot of people to be, to kind of come up with some of these initiatives like you have done. I mean, to be able to look at a mountain of cinders and build a field out of it, to me, is just mind boggling. And I take my hat off to you every time I think about it. And I just think it's you got
to fail a bunch of times too before you succeed.
Yes, we all have, and we all do. And that's true in all turf, golf course or sports turf or anything like that. But I wish you and your family the best, and I'm glad that you can spend time with them. And I guess I will see. We're recording this right before the STMA, and I probably will see you down in Savannah next week at some point.
Forward to it.
Have a cocktail or two if I'm allowed, and see what happens. Carl, thank you so much. It's a real pleasure, and I look forward to seeing you again soon.
Talk to you soon.
And that is the EarthWorks podcast. And if you are not a subscriber to our podcast, please be a subscriber so that you can get information quickly on some interesting folks like Carl Samuelson from the Newtown Parks and Rec. And we will be back next week with more interesting folks to talk dirt and turf with you. And thank you so much.